Why would
My
a
mother
father
was an
ever be
amazing
told to
woman,
leave the very house
and
he
she
paid
taught me
for with
so
his
much
life's
about
work?
life.
That question struck me like a hammer as
My
I
mother
stood in
was an
my own living
amazing
room,
woman,
grocery bags
and she
carving red
taught me
lines
so
into my
much about
palms.
life.
The late afternoon light filtered through the curtains,
My mother
but
was
there
an
was no comfort
amazing
in it.
woman,
Not
and
when
she
Marcus
taught me
Thompson,
so
my
much about
32-year-old
life.
son-in-law, lounged in Gloria's old recliner like a king in a borrowed throne. One hand dangled with a beer, the other clutched the remote as if the television belonged to him. He did not glance at me. His eyes were glued to the basketball game, his voice casual and dismissive. "Jerome, grab me another beer while you're up." I stopped in my tracks, the plastic bags heavy against my wrists. For a moment I thought I had misheard him. "Excuse me." He finally turned his head, his mouth twisting into a smirk that showed no respect. "Corona, not the cheap stuff you drink. Bring it here." Something cold settled in my chest. I had bought those Coronas with my own Social Security money stretched thinner than paper, and here he was ordering me around in the very home where I had raised my daughter, in the house Gloria and I had saved every penny to protect. Before I could respond, Danielle appeared in the doorway. My daughter, 28, hair tied back, dish towel still in her hands. She glanced between us, sensing the storm before it broke. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice carrying that edge I remembered from her teenage years. "Your father's being difficult," Marcus said smoothly, never looking away from me. "I asked him for a beer, and he's making it into some big scene." Danielle's eyes landed on me, filled not with concern, but with disappointment, as though I were the unreasonable one. "Dad, just get it. It's not worth fighting over." Her words sliced deeper than Marcus's arrogance. I had worked nights at the bank to pay her tuition, signed checks for her wedding. When Marcus's family couldn't contribute, handed over $80,000 from my retirement savings for their house. And now she looked at me like I was a stubborn child refusing to behave. "The problem," I said slowly, "is that this is my house." Marcus stood his height and bulk meant to intimidate. His beer sloshed as he waved his hand. "Your house? That's funny. Danielle and I live here. We pay the bills with my money. You want to keep staying here, you play by my rules." Danielle moved beside him, crossing her arms, her posture stiff. "Dad, you need to decide right now. Either you do what Marcus asks, or you can pack your things and leave." The ultimatum landed like a stone dropped in still water, sending shockwaves through me. My daughter, my only child, had just told me I could no longer stay in the home I had built unless I bowed to her husband's commands. I looked at her face, searching desperately for the little girl who used to braid dandelions into crowns, who once ran into my arms during summer storms. Instead, I saw a stranger hardened by entitlement and Marcus's influence. "All right," I whispered. Marcus grinned, certain he had triumphed. "Good. Now about that beer I'll pack," I interrupted. The grin faltered. Danielle's mouth parted in shock. She had expected me to plead, to apologize, to crumble. But I turned, leaving the grocery bags on the floor, and walked down the hallway with steady steps. In my bedroom, I opened the closet and pulled down the suitcase Gloria and I had used on our honeymoon to Yellowstone. It landed on the bed with a soft thump, now ready to carry the remnants of a life no longer welcome here. I packed methodically, my hands moving without hesitation. A few shirts, socks, and my worn reading glasses. My medications. The leather journal where I tracked every expense down to the last cent. And the photograph of Gloria. Her smile wrapped carefully in tissue paper. A reminder of the woman who had taught me the difference between sacrifice and surrender. Outside the door, I heard Danielle's whisper. "Dad, wait." But I did not wait. When I rolled the suitcase back into the living room, Marcus had reclaimed the recliner, but his posture was tighter now, his eyes sharp with unease. Danielle stood by the kitchen doorway, arms still crossed, but the certainty on her face was already cracking. Neither of them spoke as I walked past. The front door opened with a creak I knew as well as my own heartbeat. I stepped outside, the evening air, cool against my skin, and I did not look back. My old Buick started on the first try, faithful as ever, as if it too understood the weight of this moment. As I drove through the streets of Kalispell, memories surged, years of tuition payments, mortgage checks, and quiet sacrifices made in the name of love. Each one had felt worth it at the time, but now they added up to nothing more than entitlement and disrespect. The ultimatum replayed in my head. Obey or leave. I had chosen to leave. What Danielle and Marcus did not understand was that this was not the end. It was the beginning. They expected me to crumble without them, to keep paying, to keep serving. But they had just awakened something they could not control. For the first time in years, I felt strangely free. And freedom I knew would come with consequences neither of them could escape. The Pine Lodge Motel sat on the edge of town, a faded building with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that buzzed against the evening air. It was not much, but it was a place to stop, a place to think. The clerk at the front desk slid a key across the counter without asking questions, and within minutes I found myself unlocking a door that opened to a space both foreign and oddly comforting. The room was small. A single bed pressed against one wall, a chair by a narrow table, a dresser with a mirror that had seen better days. I set my suitcase down and sat heavily on the edge of the mattress. The springs groaned beneath me. For the first time in years, I was truly alone. The silence pressed in. At home, there had always been voices. The clatter of dishes, the blare of Marcus's television, Danielle's footsteps across the hardwood floor. Here, there was only the hum of the heater and the faint sound of cars passing on the highway. I should have felt lonely, but what I felt instead was release. I opened the suitcase and carefully lifted out the framed photograph of Gloria. Her smile seemed to reach across time, steady and gentle. I placed it on the nightstand, as if her presence could bless this shabby little room. For years I had asked myself what she would have thought of Marcus, what she would have said about the way Danielle had allowed him to take control. I already knew the answer. Gloria would have told me that dignity mattered more than comfort. The longer I sat there, the more memories came rushing back. Danielle's college tuition, $40,000 a year for 4 straight years. I had worked overtime at the bank, stayed long after the lights went out, reading loan applications until my eyes blurred. I had convinced myself it was love, that giving her everything she wanted was the way to keep her safe. Then the wedding. $25,000 for flowers, for the hall, for the dress she insisted on. Marcus's family had promised to help, but quietly admitted they had nothing. I paid it all, not wanting Danielle to feel embarrassed on what was supposed to be her happiest day. And then the house. $80,000 from my retirement savings for their down payment. I told myself that was what fathers did. Gloria would have wanted it, I thought. It was easier to believe that than to admit the truth that I was afraid of saying no. Month after month, my Social Security check disappeared into their lives. $1,200 for the mortgage, $300 for utilities, $500 for groceries when things got tight. I had convinced myself I was still needed, that my place in their home depended on my ability to provide. But tonight, sitting in this motel room, with its faded curtains and thin carpet, I saw the truth clearly. I had not been needed. I had been used. I stood and walked to the small table, pulling out the leather journal from my suitcase. Its pages were filled with numbers, neat columns of expenses written in my careful hand. Every entry was a record of sacrifice. Every dollar spent had been another brick in the prison I had built for myself. I flipped to a blank page and wrote a single sentence. It ends now. The words looked stark against the paper, almost defiant, but they gave me strength. I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen filling the dim room. The numbers of my accounts appeared, checking, savings, retirement. They were not large, not compared to what they once had been, but they were mine. For years I had denied myself small comforts so that Danielle and Marcus could live easily. Now it was time to stop. Tomorrow I would begin. Calls to the bank, calls to the insurance company, calls to the credit card companies. Step by step, I would dismantle the web that had kept them comfortable at my expense. Each account closed, each payment canceled would be a piece of my freedom returned. I leaned back in the chair, letting the weight of that realization settle. For the first time in years, the future felt open, uncharted. There would be challenges, yes. Marcus would rage. Danielle would cry. But I had already made my choice when I carried that suitcase out the door. I glanced at Gloria's photograph again. Her eyes seemed to shine even in the dim light, as if she approved. I whispered softly, "I should have done this years ago." The heater rattled, the neon outside flickered, and I closed my eyes. Sleep did not come quickly, but when it did, it came without the usual heaviness. No voices shouting in the living room. No demands for more. Only silence and a strange, quiet strength rising inside me. Tomorrow would begin the real fight. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, I felt like a man who still had choices. Sunday morning arrived gray and heavy, the kind of morning that matched the weight in my chest. I woke early, brewed motel coffee that tasted like burnt paper, and spread my papers across the small table as if I were a general planning a campaign. Bank statements, insurance policies, credit card records. For years, these numbers had been the lifeblood of Marcus and Danielle's life. Today, I was going to close every artery. The first call was to First National Bank. I knew their systems as well as my own heartbeat. 30 years of working in finance had made sure of that. After a few minutes of automated prompts, a young voice answered, "Good morning, this is Angela. How can I help you today? I need to cancel the automatic mortgage payment for 847 Pine Street account ending in 4729. There was a pause. I could hear the clicking of keys. "Sir, that payment has been active for 5 years. Are you sure you want to discontinue it?" "Completely sure." She hesitated, then asked the question I knew was coming. "May I ask the reason for the change? The homeowners no longer qualify for my financial assistance." The silence on the line told me she understood more than she could say. "Very well, Mr. Miller. The automatic payment will be canceled effective immediately. You should receive confirmation in 3 business days." I thanked her and hung up. One chain severed. The next call was to the insurance company. For 3 years, I had been paying for 2 cars. I never drove Marcus's Silverado and Danielle's Honda. $280 every month, vanishing into coverage for accidents I would never cause. "I need to remove 2 vehicles from my policy," I told the agent. "My daughter and son-in-law will need to establish their own coverage." "When would you like this change to take effect?" she asked. "Today." Another cord cut. The credit cards took longer. Danielle had been an authorized user on 3 of my accounts, and I had been paying balances that never belonged to me. $500 a month drained away into purchases I never made. I could still remember the sting of seeing new charges for designer clothes, weekend getaways, and electronics, all while I lived on day-old bread and instant coffee. "Remove all authorized users," I told the Visa representative. "Effective immediately. Any outstanding balances will remain your responsibility, Mr. Miller," she explained, "but they will no longer be able to make new charges. That is exactly what I want." One by one, the calls went out. MasterCard, Costco Utilities. Each cancellation felt like lifting a stone off my chest. Years of manipulation and quiet dependency unraveled with each confirmation number. When I finally set the phone down, the motel room was quiet except for the hum of the heater. I looked at the stack of notes I had written, dates, times, confirmation numbers. Proof that I was no longer their bank account with legs. For a moment, fear flickered through me. I had no illusions about how Marcus would react when he discovered the payments were gone. Anger, maybe even rage. Danielle would cry, call me, beg me to fix it. She would remind me of every sacrifice I had already made, every dollar I had given. But this time I would not bend. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. Outside, a man and his wife were loading suitcases into the back of an old pickup truck. They moved with practiced ease, passing bags back and forth, laughing quietly. I envied their partnership. Gloria and I had been like that once, working side by side, certain of each other. I let the curtain fall and returned to the table. My laptop screen glowed with the balances of my accounts. For years, those numbers had dwindled, siphoned away into the lives of two people who believed they were entitled to everything I had. Today, for the first time in years, the numbers would remain still. Mine alone. The motel felt less empty now. The silence was not a hollow void, but a protective shell. I realized that every call I made today was not just about money. It was about respect. It was about drawing a line in the sand that should have been drawn long ago. By noon, I had made 8 calls. Mortgage stopped. Insurance canceled. Credit cards blocked. Automatic transfers ended. A paper trail of independence lay before me. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair. My body was tired, but my spirit felt lighter. For the first time in a long time, I was no longer giving away pieces of myself just to be tolerated in a house I had built. I knew the phone would start ringing soon. They would discover the missing payments. Their mortgage would bounce, their insurance would lapse, their credit cards would decline. And when it did, Marcus and Danielle would realize that the life they had been living was built on my back, not their own. I whispered to Gloria's photograph on the nightstand. It's done. No more. Outside, the Neon motel sign buzzed faintly. Cars passed on the highway carrying strangers to their own destinations. And in that small, worn room, I felt the first real taste of freedom I had known in years. Tomorrow would bring the fallout. But tonight, I was ready for it. The phone started ringing on Wednesday. At first, I let it vibrate on the motel table without touching it. Unknown numbers, missed calls piling up one by one. I knew exactly who it was. Danielle and Marcus had finally noticed the missing payments. By noon, there were 12 messages waiting. By Friday, the count had reached 22. I sat in the stiff motel chair, scrolling through them one by one, listening to the voices of my daughter and her husband unravel. The first ones sounded casual, even dismissive. Danielle's voice was light, almost playful. Dad, I think there's a banking error. The mortgage payment didn't go through. Can you check with the bank and fix it? Thanks. Marcus's message came next, his tone sharp and annoyed. Clark, my insurance lapsed. I had to hear it from the dealership. Fix this. I don't have time for mistakes. Mistakes. That was what he called years of me paying his bills, carrying him on my back while he pretended to be a man. As the week wore on, the tone shifted. Danielle's voice cracked with strain. Dad, the bank says you canceled the automatic payment. They want the full amount by Friday or they'll start foreclosure. What's going on? Please call me back. Marcus grew harsher. Clark, you need to fix this right now. People are asking questions about my insurance. You're making us look like deadbeats. By the end, desperation crept into their words. Danielle's sobs filled the voicemail box. Dad, please, we can't do this without you. I don't know what Marcus was thinking when he spoke to you like that. We'll make it right. Just come home, please. Marcus tried a softer approach. Look, maybe I was too harsh. Let's put this behind us. Just turn the payments back on and we can forget this ever happened. I deleted each one after listening, my finger steady on the button. I felt no guilt, only a mild curiosity at how quickly the facade was crumbling. On Thursday morning, there was a knock at the motel door. Through the peephole, I saw them both. Danielle's hair was unkempt, her sweater wrinkled. Marcus looked pale and angry, a man who had not slept in days. I opened the door, but did not invite them in. Dad, Danielle began, her eyes rimmed red, her voice breaking. We need to talk. About what I asked evenly. Marcus pushed forward, his jaw clenched. About the fact that you're trying to ruin our lives over some stupid argument about beer. I'm not trying to ruin anything, I said calmly. I am simply no longer paying for your lives. The mortgage, Clark Marcus's voice rose. You can't just stop paying the mortgage. That's our house. Actually, it's my house, I corrected him. My name is on the deed. My signature is on the loan. You two were just guests. Danielle grabbed his arm as he stepped closer, fear flashing in her eyes. Dad, please. We can work this out. Marcus was wrong to talk to you that way. We both were. But you can't just leave us with no warning, no discussion. You gave me an ultimatum, I reminded her. Obey Marcus or get out. Those were your exact words. Her lips trembled. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. I looked at her carefully. You just didn't expect me to choose option 2. Marcus tried again, his voice suddenly smooth like a salesman trying to salvage a deal. Look, we all said things we didn't mean. But you're talking about our home, our credit, our whole lives. You can't just pull the rug out from under us. I can, I replied, and I did. I began to close the door. You wanted me to leave. I left. You wanted to handle your own lives. Now you can. Dad, wait, Danielle cried. What about family? What about everything we've been through together? I paused my hand on the doorframe. For a moment I saw the little girl who once ran through the yard with dandelions in her hair, who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms. Then I remembered the woman who had stood silently while her husband humiliated me. Family works both ways, Danielle, I said quietly. I spent 5 years taking care of you both. When it was time for you to take care of me, you chose him instead. Marcus's mask cracked, his voice full of fury. You crazy old man. You can't just, I can call the police if you keep raising your voice, I cut him off. This is private property. You're disturbing the peace. For a second, they both stared at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Not the soft-hearted father and grandfather-to-be they imagined, not the endless wallet they had relied on, but a man who had finally learned to say no. Marcus grabbed Danielle's elbow and muttered, Come on! We'll figure this out ourselves. She looked back at me, her eyes wet, her face torn between anger and regret. Then they walked away, shoulders hunched, the swagger gone. I closed the door and returned to the table. My notes spread neatly across the surface. There were still accounts to close, still numbers to protect. The work of dismantling dependency was not finished. But for the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten. I felt free. Saturday morning, I walked into the diner on Main Street, the one Gloria and I used to visit after her doctor appointments. The bell above the door jingled and the smell of coffee and bacon grease wrapped around me like an old coat. I wanted a quiet corner, just a booth where I could drink coffee and gather my thoughts. But the moment I slid into the seat, a familiar voice called my name. Jerome Miller. I'll be damned. I looked up and saw Robert Harris standing near the window with a folded newspaper under his arm. We had worked together for more than 15 years at First National. He had handled commercial loans while I managed personal accounts, but we had shared enough breaks and late nights to call each other friends. Robert, I said, rising to shake his hand. Good to see you. It's been a long time. Since Gloria's service, he said gently. Mind if I sit? I gestured to the seat across from me. He ordered coffee, then leaned in with a serious expression. I heard you've been staying out at Pine Lodge. Everything all right, I hesitated, unsure how much to share. But Robert was a banker, and bankers saw more than most. Family situation, I said finally. I needed some space. Robert studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. Your son-in-law tried to pull a fast one on us a few months back. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. What kind of fast one? He came in with paperwork for a home equity loan. $50,000. Said the house on Pine Street was his property. The diner's noise seemed to fade. My house, Robert nodded. That's right. He brought in documents that looked official at first glance, but when we ran the title search, everything came back to you. Clean title. No co-signers, no liens, nothing that gave him any claim. I set the cup down carefully, my hands steady only by force of will. When exactly was this December? Maybe January. I handled it personally because of the amount involved. Jerome, those documents weren't just a mistake. They were forged. The words hit me like a bucket of cold water. 3 months ago, while I was still paying his mortgage, Marcus had been trying to steal the very roof over my head. Did you report it? I asked. We denied the application and flagged his information in our system. Since no money changed hands, it's technically a gray area, but I kept copies. Something told me I might need them. I leaned forward. What was he planning to use the money for? Robert lowered his voice. He listed home improvements, but word around town is Marcus has gambling debts. Pretty substantial ones. How substantial, Detective James Morrison might know more. He mentioned Marcus being a regular at Glacier Peaks Casino. High-stakes tables. He's been showing up more often lately. I sat back, my mind racing. The beer in my living room, the arrogance, the entitlement. It all made sense now. I had not been dealing with a lazy son-in-law. I had been dealing with a desperate man, one who had already decided I was his easiest mark. Robert, I said quietly, appreciate you telling me. He reached across the table and squeezed my shoulder. Be careful. A man who forges documents to steal from family might do other desperate things. When I walked out of the diner, the sun was brighter, the air sharper. My steps carried me straight to the courthouse. I had no intention of waiting for Marcus to try again. The courthouse was a brick building that had intimidated me as a young man, but now felt like an ally. The clerk on the second floor processed eviction notices with professional calm. Mr. Miller, you understand this is your daughter's residence, she asked, reviewing the property deed I had provided. It is my property, I answered. The residents have violated the terms of their occupancy, and those terms are mutual respect and contribution to expenses. Both have been breached. She stamped the papers with a finality that echoed through the office. The 30-day notice begins today. If they contest it, we will schedule a hearing. Otherwise, the sheriff will serve final papers after the deadline. How long before they receive it? Usually within 48 hours. I walked out of that courthouse with the papers in hand and a strange sense of justice rising in my chest. No more whispered threats. No more ultimatums in my own home. This time everything would move through proper channels. But there was still more to uncover. Robert had mentioned Detective Morrison, and I knew him well. We had served on the church building committee together, and his daughter had graduated with Danielle. If anyone knew the truth about Marcus's gambling, it would be James. I drove straight to the police station. His office was tucked in the back, cluttered with case files and the smell of burnt coffee. He stood when I entered, lines deeper around his eyes than I remembered, but his handshake still firm. Jerome, he said. What brings you here? Information, I replied. Robert Harris told me Marcus tried to take out a loan on my house. He also said you might know something about gambling debts. James listened carefully as I explained, his pen scratching across a notepad. When I finished, he nodded. Your son-in-law is definitely known at Glacier Peaks, he said. Regular at the poker tables. Staff mentioned he's been playing higher stakes lately. We estimate he owes between $18,000 and $20,000. The number staggered me. Marcus had been sitting in my recliner demanding I fetch him a beer while secretly drowning in debt big enough to buy a new car. Who does he owe? I asked. A mix of banks, small lenders, and people you don't want to owe. The legitimate ones are getting impatient. The others prefer not to involve law enforcement. He's been stalling for about 6 weeks. Most creditors give 3 months before they escalate. Marcus is running out of road. I felt both anger and clarity. The ultimatum in my living room had not been about respect. It had been about control. He had already decided my money was his lifeline. My refusal to obey had threatened everything he was hiding. "James, I said I need to protect myself." He leaned back in his chair. "Start with eviction, keep every document. And Jerome, watch yourself. Desperate men do reckless things." That night back in my motel room, I opened my laptop and created a new file labeled Marcus Thompson Evidence. Robert's testimony. James's notes, the eviction order. One by one, I added the pieces. The picture was becoming clear. Marcus was not just disrespectful, he was dangerous. And now I had the proof. Sunday morning, I woke to another round of calls. This time, the names on the screen were familiar neighbors, people who rarely reached out except to share concern. One after another, they told me the same thing. Marcus had been making the rounds in town, talking loudly in the hardware store, at the gas station, even outside the church steps. He was painting me as a senile old man who had abandoned his own daughter out of spite. By noon, the story had spread far enough that even the cashier at the diner gave me a long look as I ordered coffee. I could almost hear Marcus's words echoing in her mind. He was trying to control the narrative, desperate to shift attention from his own debts and lies. That afternoon, the phone rang again. This time it was Detective Morrison. His voice carried a warning. "Jerome, I wanted you to know Marcus came by the station this morning. He tried filing a complaint. Claims you're the victim of elder abuse, being manipulated by bankers into making bad decisions. He said you're not competent." I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. "Did you believe him?" James gave a short laugh. "Jerome, I've known you for years." "Of course not. But he's trying to create a paper trail to make you look unstable." I advised him that without medical documentation, he has no case. Still be prepared. He's not giving up easily. I thanked him and hung up, more resolved than ever. Marcus was no longer just angry. He was dangerous in his desperation. An hour later, Danielle's number appeared. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice came through thick with tears. "Dad, please listen. I know you're angry, but there's something you don't understand." "What is it, Danielle?" "I'm pregnant," she whispered. "The stress from all this is making me sick. The doctor says I could lose the baby if things don't calm down." "Dad, you always said family comes first. Please, for your grandchild, fix this." The words cut straight into me. For years, my protective instinct had been the weapon they used most effectively. The idea of a grandchild in danger twisted my heart. But something about her tone made me pause. It sounded rehearsed, practiced like lines delivered in a play. "Congratulations," I said softly. "When did you find out?" "Last week," she said quickly. "Right before everything fell apart." "And which doctor did you see?" A long silence. "Dr. Richards at the women's clinic." I knew Dr. Richards. Gloria had seen her for years. "I'll call her office," I said firmly. "I'll cover any medical expenses. That way I know your care is handled properly." "Dad, you can't just call my doctor." Danielle snapped, her tears vanishing into sharpness. "You're right," I replied evenly. "But you can have her call me directly." There was another pause, then the line went dead. By evening, Marcus had escalated again. I found him outside the bank the next morning, a crowd gathered around as he told anyone who would listen that I had lost my mind. "He kicked his own pregnant daughter out," Marcus shouted. "Over nothing. He's losing it." The moment I walked up, the crowd shifted. Whispers rippled through them. Marcus turned, his face flushing red. "There he is," he barked. "The man who abandoned his family." I kept my voice calm. "How are the gambling debts, Marcus?" The words hit him like a punch. The crowd murmured, heads turning, eyes narrowing. "You don't know what you're talking about," he sputtered. $18,000, I said clearly. "Glacier Peaks Casino," Poker tables mostly. That is what you have been hiding, isn't it? Silence fell heavy over the group. A woman near the back whispered something to her husband, and I saw him nod grimly. "You're crazy," Marcus snapped. "He's senile. Don't listen to him. I can document every dollar I've spent supporting you for 5 years," I said firmly. "Can you document where your paychecks went?" The murmurs grew louder. People pulled out their phones, already sending messages spreading the truth. Marcus's face went from red to purple. He stepped closer, towering over me, his voice cracking with rage. "You old fool, you can't just— You wanted me gone," I cut in. "You got what you wanted. Now you live with the consequences." The crowd watched as Marcus stormed away, his wife trailing behind her, head down. The story he had tried to spin was unraveling before his eyes. That evening I sat in my motel room writing everything down. Dates, times, witnesses. Each escalation went into the evidence file. Each threat became another layer of protection for me. Later that night, the motel manager knocked on my door. Steve Brennan, a retired Army sergeant, spoke with quiet authority. "Mr. Miller, that son-in-law of yours was out in the parking lot tonight, pacing near your door. Made the guests nervous. Muttered something about teaching old fools lessons. We've got it on security video if you need it." I thanked him and asked if he would be willing to provide it to the police. He nodded without hesitation. The next morning, I returned to the station with the USB drive and a written statement. Detective Morrison studied the footage and shook his head. "Jerome, this shows a clear pattern of intimidation. Combined with what I saw yesterday, we have grounds for a restraining order." "What would that mean?" "Marcus would be legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of you or your property. If he violates it, we arrest him immediately." The words brought a strange kind of relief. Marcus had been planning for years to use me, to drain me, even to steal my house. Now the law would stand between us. I signed the papers, each stroke of the pen another boundary reclaimed. Walking out of the station, I knew the battle was far from over. Marcus was desperate, and desperate men rarely stop until they are forced to. But for the first time, I had more than dignity on my side. I had the law. And Marcus, no matter how loudly he shouted, no matter how many lies he told, could not change that. By Friday morning, the town already knew more than I had told anyone. Word in a place like Kalispell traveled faster than any letter. At the post office, Mrs. Henderson from the church mailing committee cornered me near the stamp machine. She had always been the kind of woman who collected information like other people collected recipes. "Jerome, dear, I've been hearing troubling things," she whispered, her voice full of curiosity. "People say your son-in-law has been speaking poorly of you. Is everything all right?" I chose my words carefully. "Danielle and Marcus asked me to leave the house, so I did. They wanted to handle their own responsibilities." Her eyebrows shot up. "They asked you to leave your own house, and after everything you paid for their wedding and that down payment. I always wondered how they afforded that house on his salary." I said nothing more, but her sharp eyes caught enough. By Sunday service, she would repeat my words to half the congregation, and the truth would spread itself. At Miller's Hardware that afternoon, the reactions were even more direct. Tom Kowalski, the owner, looked up from his inventory sheets when I walked in. His face broke into lines of concern. "Jerome, I heard you've been staying out at Pine Lodge." "What's going on?" I explained briefly, just the facts. Danielle siding with Marcus, the ultimatum, my decision to leave. Tom's employees gathered as I spoke, their faces turning from surprise to outrage. "You paid her college tuition?" one asked, shaking his head. "Marcus told everybody his family covered it." Another added, "He bragged about helping you with the mortgage, said he was keeping you afloat." I met their eyes calmly. Marcus said a lot of things that were not true. Tom's expression hardened. "That explains why he always had money, but never worked extra hours. We offered him overtime plenty of times. He always had other commitments." "Commitments at the casino," Sarah from the paint counter muttered. By the time I left the store, I knew their words would be repeated across town before dinner. Kalispell was a small organism, and once it sensed dishonesty, it moved quickly to expose it. That evening, I went to see Pastor Williams. He welcomed me into his office with the same kindness he had offered after Gloria's funeral. His coffee was hot, his chair comfortable, but his eyes were direct. "Jerome," he said gently, "have heard that you've stepped away from your daughter's household. Can you help me understand what has happened?" I told him not every detail, but enough. The ultimatum, the years of financial sacrifice, the disrespect that had pushed me out. He leaned back, thoughtful. Sometimes loving someone means allowing them to face the consequences of their choices. It sounds like you've protected them for a very long time. Too long, I admitted. His nod was slow but full of understanding. What you have done is painful, but it is also necessary. The congregation will see that. The words stayed with me as I left the church and walked down Main Street. I stopped at Annie's coffee shop for an afternoon cup, but the usual chatter sounded different. People were whispering not about the weather or the price of gas, but about Marcus. "Did you hear he owes money all over town?" someone said at the next table. "I heard Jerome paid their bills for years," another replied. By the time I finished my coffee, I knew Marcus's false story was collapsing. The truth was spreading not because I shouted it, but because people recognized what made sense. His arrogance, his sudden wealth without work, his disdain for me while I carried their burdens. The town was putting the pieces together. Later that evening, my phone rang again. It was Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor of 20 years. Her voice carried genuine worry. "Jerome, I hope you don't mind me calling. There's been a lot of shouting at the house lately. Mostly Marcus. Yesterday, the police even drove by twice." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson," I said softly. "I appreciate you keeping an eye on things." "Are you safe where you are?" she asked. "Yes," I assured her, "just taking it one day at a time." After we hung up, I sat in the motel room and thought about how quickly the tide was turning. For years, I had been the silent provider hidden behind Marcus's lies. Now, with just a few words of truth and a town that valued honesty, the balance was shifting. The phone buzzed again before I could put it down. This time, the caller identified himself as Marcus Webb from Frontier Financial Services. His message was short and pointed. "We are looking for Marcus Thompson regarding a past due account. Please call us at your earliest convenience." Of course, Marcus had listed my address on his credit applications. He had always expected me to shoulder his debts to cover his tracks. But now the creditors would find him directly. I deleted the message and opened my evidence file. Another piece of the puzzle, another record for the folder. When I closed the laptop, I allowed myself a long breath. The community now knew. The creditors were closing in. Marcus's lies were unraveling faster than he could spin them. I looked at Gloria's picture on the nightstand. "It's working," I whispered. They see him clearly now. Outside, the neon sign flickered against the night sky, but inside, for the first time in years, I felt the steady warmth of justice beginning to grow. 2 days of silence passed before I decided it was time. I had watched Marcus unravel in front of the town, watched creditors circle like vultures, watched Danielle cling to him as if loyalty could erase his lies. But I knew the next step had to come from me. Wednesday morning, I called her. My voice was steady. "Danielle, meet me at the diner this afternoon. 2 o'clock. Just you." She hesitated. "I can't leave Marcus alone right now. He's really struggling." "Then we have nothing to discuss. The restraining order means I cannot be near him anyway." A long pause stretched across the line. Finally, she said, "We're Main Street Diner. The back corner booth. We need to talk privately." When I arrived, I chose the booth facing away from the street. I wanted no distractions, no excuses. The clock ticked past 2 before the bell over the door rang, and Danielle walked in. She looked older than 28, the weight of sleepless nights etched into her face. She spotted me and walked slowly, sliding into the seat across from me. "Dad," she began before the waitress could even bring water. "I know you're angry, but things are worse than you realize. Marcus lost his job. Debt collectors keep coming to the house. The phone won't stop ringing. People are asking questions we can't answer." I let her finish before I spoke. "I am offering you one chance, Danielle. One chance to step away from all of this with some dignity." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean public acknowledgement of the truth?" I said evenly. "Full disclosure. Everything I have done for you and Marcus. The tuition, the wedding, the mortgage, the groceries, and the ultimatum that forced me to leave. You stand before the community and admit it." Her face flushed crimson. "You want me to humiliate myself? I want you to tell the truth. There is a difference." She stared down at the table, twisting the napkin in her hands. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "3 things. First, you stand in church this Sunday during testimony time and speak the truth. Second, you write a letter to the editor of the Tribune and sign your name. Third, you post it publicly online where everyone who believed Marcus's lies can see the reality." Her hands shook. People will think, I interrupted gently, "that your father loved you enough to sacrifice his retirement for your happiness, and that you took it for granted until it was gone." Her eyes filled with tears. "What about Marcus?" "Marcus is no longer part of any equation involving me. The restraining order is permanent. If you choose to stay married to him, that is your decision. But it means choosing him over any relationship with me." She whispered, "You're asking me to choose between my husband and my father. I am asking you to choose between a man who threatened me in my own home and the man who raised you. If you see those choices as equal, then I already know how far we have drifted." Silence hung between us. I could see the war inside her, the girl who once brought me wildflowers struggling with the woman who had stood by as her husband humiliated me. Finally, she whispered, "What about the house? It is no longer yours to worry about. The will is changed. The house is going to the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative. 3 families who understand sacrifice will live there." Her eyes widened, shock spreading across her face. "Even if I do what you're asking, the house is gone, yes. Because I need to know that any reconciliation between us is built on love, not inheritance. I will not let property be the rope that drags us back into dependency." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Dad. I never meant for it to go this far." "Sorry is just a word," I said quietly. "The town watched you and Marcus treat me like a servant in my own home. They heard your ultimatum. Words will not erase that. Only action will." She buried her face in her hands for a moment, then looked up and her eyes red but clear. "What if I can't do it? What if I stand in front of everyone and the words won't come out?" "Then you live with the consequences. Marcus will likely leave town soon to escape his creditors. You can go with him and carry his debts, or you can stay and rebuild a life of honesty. That choice is yours." Her voice was a whisper. "And if I do what you're asking, then maybe we begin again. Slowly. Not as father and dependent child, but as 2 adults building respect, one honest act at a time." She nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping, as if the weight of the decision pressed down on her. "How long do I have Sunday morning?" I said firmly. 10 o'clock service. If you are not there, I will know your choice." She stood fumbling for her purse strap. At the doorway she paused, her voice trembling. "Dad, do you think you could ever forgive me?" I looked at her carefully, really looked at her. And for a fleeting moment, I saw the little girl who once begged me for bedtime stories about brave princesses. "Forgiveness and trust are different things," I forgave you the day I chose to leave rather than fight. But trust must be earned back one honest action at a time. She nodded, then walked out into the street, shoulders bent under the burden of the decision that would shape the rest of her life. I remained in the booth long after she had gone, listening to the clink of dishes and the murmur of other diners. Sunday was only 4 days away. By then, I would know whether my daughter had the courage to choose truth over comfort. Sunday morning came cold and clear. I walked slowly up the steps of St. Mark's, the same church where Gloria and I had once sung hymns side by side, where Danielle had been baptized, where the community gathered for weddings and funerals alike. The sanctuary was fuller than usual. Word had spread that something important was going to happen. I felt dozens of eyes follow me as I took my usual seat 3 rows from the front. The service began with hymns I had known all my life. Voices rose strong and familiar, but beneath them I felt the weight of expectation. Pastor Williams read scripture, but even he seemed to sense that the congregation was waiting for something more. When the time for testimony came, silence filled the air, heavy and expectant. Then Danielle stood. From the back pew, she walked slowly down the aisle, her steps small but steady. Her hands gripped the sides of the podium as she reached the front. She looked out at faces she had known since childhood, neighbors and teachers, friends of her late mother. Her voice trembled at first, but then grew clear. "I need to tell you all something about my father," she began. The sanctuary hushed even further, every eye locked on her. "For the past 5 years, my father, Jerome Miller, has supported my husband and me financially. He paid for my education $160,000 when I could have gone to a state school. He paid for my wedding $25,000 when Marcus's family could not afford to contribute. He gave us his family home, the house where he lived with my mother for 20 years. And when we struggled with bills, he paid the mortgage, the utilities, even the groceries." A ripple moved through the pews, people shifting in surprise, whispers rising and falling like waves. Danielle's voice strengthened as she went on. "3 weeks ago, when my father refused to follow my husband's orders, we gave him an ultimatum: obey Marcus or leave his own house. And my father chose to leave rather than give up his dignity." Gasps broke the silence. Even the children seemed to sense the weight of what was being spoken. I stood by and let my husband disrespect the man who had sacrificed everything for me. I chose loyalty to someone who threatened my father over loyalty to the man who raised me with patience and love. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she did not stop. I was wrong. Marcus was wrong. My father deserved gratitude and respect, and instead, we gave him ultimatums and demands. I am standing here because my father offered me one last chance to choose truth over pride. I am choosing truth. She turned her eyes toward me, and in that moment, the church was silent except for her voice. "Dad, I know sorry is not enough for what I put you through, but I am asking for forgiveness. I want to start again." The congregation erupted into murmurs, then applause, some voices breaking into amens. Pastor Williams stepped forward, his own eyes moist. "Sometimes the hardest courage is admitting our mistakes publicly. Danielle has shown that courage today, and her father has shown us what dignity looks like under pressure." As the service ended, people came to me with embraces and handshakes. Mrs. Henderson squeezed my hand and whispered, "We suspected you were helping them, but we never knew the depth of your sacrifice." Tom from the hardware store clapped my shoulder. "That took character, Jerome. Setting boundaries is never easy when family is involved." But the most meaningful moment came when Danielle approached me outside the church. She wiped her face, her eyes swollen but resolute. "The letter to the Tribune will run Wednesday. The Facebook post goes up tonight. I am doing everything you asked." I nodded. "And Marcus?" Her voice was quiet. "He left town yesterday, packed his truck while I was at work and drove off. No note, No forwarding address. I was not surprised. Men like Marcus always ran when consequences arrived. I filed for divorce this morning, she added. I found out he had been using my credit cards for gambling without telling me. The debts are worse than I imagined. But I will deal with them. Honestly, this time. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. The town now knew the truth. My daughter had stood in front of them and admitted her mistakes. Marcus was gone. And though the road to rebuilding trust would be long, a first step had been taken. As we walked away from the church together, the crisp air carried a sense of something new. For the first time in years, I felt the possibility that family might mean more than dependency, that maybe honesty and respect could still grow where lies and entitlement had once ruled. 3 months later, I stood on the front lawn of what used to be my family home. The place looked different now. Fresh paint covered the walls, new railings lined the porch, and a playground had been added near the backyard. It no longer belonged to Danielle or Marcus, or even to me. It had become something more. The Montana Veterans Housing Initiative had finished the renovations and turned the house into 3 separate apartments for families who had served their country. As I watched the moving trucks unload, I felt no regret, only relief. The house that had once been the center of conflict was now a place of healing. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos arrived first, guiding her 2 young children toward the playground. She turned to me with a smile that carried both gratitude and exhaustion. Mr. Miller, this means everything to us. A stable place to live, a safe place for my kids. Veterans understand sacrifice, I told her quietly. This house should serve people who know the meaning of service. She nodded, her eyes moist, before turning back to her children, who were already laughing on the swings. Other families followed, each one bringing life into a house that had once been filled with anger and demands. Watching them carried me back to the night I walked out with my suitcase. Back then I had wondered if I was making a mistake. But standing there now, seeing children play and parents smile, I knew I had chosen correctly. My own life had settled into a rhythm I never thought I would find again. The lakeside cabin I purchased was small, but it suited me. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen where I could cook simple meals, a dock where I could launch my boat. Mornings began with coffee on the deck overlooking Flathead Lake. Afternoons were spent fishing, evenings reading. Simple routines, but after years of chaos, they felt like luxury. Danielle and I spoke cautiously at first. She kept her word, sending me copies of the letter that appeared in the Tribune, screenshots of the posts she made online. Each was clear, honest, and public. She did not try to soften her guilt or minimize her mistakes. She wrote plainly about the years of support I had given and the ultimatum that drove me out. The responses poured in. Neighbors, church members, even old friends commented with encouragement. Some offered her jobs, others offered advice, but nearly all expressed admiration for her courage. For me, it was not the words of strangers that mattered, but the fact that she was willing to stand in the open light of truth. One Saturday morning, my phone buzzed with a message from her. Dad, I am 3 months into counseling and learning a lot about healthy relationships. Could we meet for coffee? I would like to earn your trust back, one conversation at a time. I stared at the message for a long while before replying. Coffee sounds good. Saturday morning at the diner. She arrived looking tired but healthier, her eyes clearer than they had been in years. We talked about small things first. Nothing heavy, just life and plans. She told me she had found work at a local nonprofit. She said she was learning how to manage money, how to stand on her own without leaning on others. I listened, offering no judgment, only quiet nods. I knew rebuilding trust would take time, but the fact that she was showing up, taking responsibility, meant more than any apology. When she asked if I could ever forgive her, I told her what I had always known. Forgiveness was given the day I walked out. Trust, Danielle, that is something you will earn back piece by piece. She nodded, accepting the truth without flinching. It was the first real sign that she was growing into the woman Gloria had always hoped she would become. That evening back at the cabin, I sat on the deck watching the sun set behind the Rockies. The lake shimmered gold, and in the distance I could hear the laughter of children from the veterans' housing complex. The sound carried across the water, a reminder that the house I once surrendered now sheltered those who understood the meaning of sacrifice better than most. I felt Gloria's presence in that moment, as if she were beside me smiling softly. Dignity had been preserved, justice had been served, and maybe, just maybe, the bond between father and daughter could be rebuilt on something stronger than obligation. As I put down my coffee cup, my phone buzzed again. A simple message from Danielle. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled at the words, not because they erased the past, but because they promised a future built on honesty. The night deepened, the stars appeared, and I knew with certainty that walking away had been the hardest but most important step of my life. True dignity comes not from giving endlessly, but from knowing when to stop. Family is not measured by how much you can sacrifice, but by how much honesty and respect you share. Boundaries are not walls to divide us, but doors that protect love and allow it to grow.